It's game 6 of the World Championship match between Nepomniachtchi and Liren in Kazakhstan. And it's an incredible match so far with 3 decisive games out of the first 5 games played. This time it's up to Liren to try to fight back in the match. It's 3-2 for Nepo. And Liren is playing with the white pieces. He starts with the move 1d4. A bit of a surprise because the game he won, he started with the move 1c4. And we got a very interesting clash in the English opening. But clearly Ding wanted to surprise his opponent with a new opening. And he chose for the so-called London system with the move bishop f4. Placing the bishop on a nice square before placing the pawn on e3. So you see these 3 pawns are nicely placed on dark squares. The bishop is outside the pawn chain. So there are no weaknesses in such a setup. It's a very solid type of game. And that's probably what Ding wanted. Just to have some control and not get any razor sharp tactical fight. At least for a start, because you never know what's going to happen later in the game. Nepo played here the move knight to c6. Knight bd2. All has been seen very often before. And here Nepo decided to take on d4. cd4, e takes d4, and we have a typical asymmetrical pawn structure. With white having an extra c pawn and black an extra pawn in the center. First, Nepo also brings out the bishop to f5. And here we get to see quite a number of standard moves. White plays c3. The bishop is doing actually quite well on f5, preventing the white bishop from coming to d3. Black went e6, bishop b5, putting pressure on the knight, and in certain cases white may even consider a move like knight e5. Bishop d6 on the board, and now after bishop takes d6, queen takes d6, the dark squared bishops are exchanged. Looks like a very dry position, but let's wait and see what happens. White castled, black did the same, and now white puts its rook on the half-open e-file. Pretty standard type of play, and I think around this stage Nepo was struggling to come up with an active plan. Maybe it's not the kind of position he likes. He usually likes more sharp, dynamical play, and here the position is more static. The pawns have been fixed in the center. And well, his next move, h6, personally I didn't really understand what his idea was of this move. And white now got a chance to put a knight on e5. And that's a good move. Because it's the knight, first of all, is actively placed there. But it also opens up the path for the queen to be developed. So that the rooks will be connected as well. And one of the main ideas, of course, is that black cannot take on e5 because of d takes e5 with a double attack on the queen and knight. If the queen goes away to counterattack the bishop, white is going to take on f6. Black can avoid the loss of a material, but after f takes g7, king takes, white can put a knight on b3. And look, this king is certainly more vulnerable than white, so I would always take white in such position. And then there's also a small positional threat here. Because if black is playing carelessly, with a move like a6 instead, there is bishop takes c6. White is really happy to trade off the bishop for the knight. Why? Because after b takes c6, white is going to follow up with the move b4. Intending to follow up with knight b3, intending to anchor the knight on c5. And look at both knights, they are fantastically placed, dominating the structure on the dark squares in the center. Black has been deprived of any sort of counterplay, and the pawn on a6 can later become vulnerable. That explains Nepo's move. He played here the move knight e7, but it's a passive move. Where's the knight going to? It just avoids that particular exchange on c6. And white continues here expanding with the move a4. And this has a clear purpose, and I think Nepo underestimated white's plan. Let's have a look. Nepo decided to kick the bishop away with a6. And the bishop is just happy to drop back to f1. It's a solid spot for the bishop. The bishop can hopefully return into play to a more active square later. But now white's plan is to put the pawn on a5, to fix these pawns on the light squares. And once that pawn is there, look, the knight is heading for the c5 square. And once again, these two knights having a firm grip on the center. If you try to avoid it by playing a5 yourself, then you're weakening the b5 square. White may consider to place its bishop there again, but another very thematical move is to improve the knight via b1 to a3 and then later to b5. And once again, that knight has a wonderful outpost as it can no longer be chased by any of black's pawns. In the game, black played differently. Black played knight d7, offering the exchange of knights, and I think Ding was very happy to see this exchange coming, because now after knight takes, queen takes, he got a chance to put a pawn on a5 as he really wanted. Black played queen c7 to keep an eye on the pawn on a5. And now white played queen f3, getting the queen to a more active square. Rook fc8. Maybe it's not entirely clear what black is intending to do, but I think this move is mainly directed at, against white's plan of playing the move b4, as once you do it now, the pawn on c3 can be taken. And that also explains white's idea of playing rook a3 here first. And rook a3 is also a very nice prophylactical move. Because first of all, okay, you're trying to get in this move b4 and hopefully at some point that knight will land on c5. But black cannot do anything active. Black's pieces are standing there, but they don't have a clear purpose. If you try to become active with b5, trying to break free on the queen side, white's going to take en passant, queen takes, and now b4. This is an excellent move, and the knight once again is intending to go to b3, later on c5, with enormous pressure against the pawn on a6. Because look, white has two rooks on the a file, a knight which can come to c5, and a bishop on f1. That pawn is likely to fall. And in case of a5, there is rook a to e1. With the idea to pin the pawn. Black cannot take on b4. So black played bishop g6 instead. And now white continued with its plan of bringing the knight from b3 to c5. Knight c6 with the idea that knight c5 is not possible, as that would drop the pawn on a5. So instead, white went here for the move queen g3. Interesting moment, offering the exchange of queens. But if that happens, then this endgame should definitely be better for white, with great practical chances to exert pressure against these pawns on the queen side. So black declined the invitation to play this queenless middle game. Kept queens on the board with queen e7. And now once again, knight c5 is not a good move because of knight takes a5. This is a hidden tactic with the idea that after rook takes a5 there is b6 with a counterattack against both the knight and rook. So white prepares here with the move h4. Remarkable idea, but trying to weaken black's position. And look, once again, do you see an active plan for black? I failed to see anything active. Black played here the move rook e8. But now the knight went to c5 anyway. So it's arriving on its favorable square. And the point is that now the same tactic with knight takes a5 simply doesn't work because of rook takes a5 and b6. Black tries to break free by simplifying, but I'm pretty sure that Ding had planned here the fantastic shot h5. The rook cannot be taken because of h takes g6, and white has two fantastic pieces for the rook. That's clearly better for white. While in case of bishop takes h5, there is this fantastic blow, knight takes e6. This is the first big tactic of the game, threatening mate, because you cannot save the piece. You give back the knight, but after f takes e6, there is rook takes d5, and the position is just falling apart. Nice, beautiful tactic as the queen is pinned. For instance, after e d5, there is rook takes e7, and now queen h4 does attack both the bishop and rook. White wins material. Hence, we see here the move e5. That was black's idea when he went for these moves queen e7 and rook e8, trying to activate these forces. Very understandable, but maybe it's not really going to work. White could have played here the move b4, cementing the knight on c5. I think that's a typical strategy. And if black continues with e4, we are happy to undermine this pawn with the move f3. Later on the rook, which has done its job on the queen side, we have managed to create this fantastic configuration with a knight on c5. Long term speaking, there are huge problems regarding that pawn on b7. But very soon the rook will come to e2 and black has big trouble. But white played differently. I think Ding also didn't play optimally now. He played rook b3, intending to meet knight takes a5 with the rook takes e5. So both sides are capturing a pawn. This rook is active. And now you cannot really take on b3 because there's rook takes e7. And after rook takes e7, black doesn't get two rooks for the queen because white eventually can take on b3 as well. Black played queen f6, moving the queen away. It's probably the best square because if you go to any other square like queen d6, you're standing in the line of the queen. So there's rook takes e8, queen takes d6, and the queen is gone. So queen b6 on the board. Rook is still hanging, so white moves the rook away, threatening the knight. And white has a nice position, nice pawn structure, better bishop, better knight. Everything is a bit better. Black went for knight c4, offering the exchange of bishop for the knight. And that's a good thing to do. White still has the upper hand in this middle game. Bishop takes c4, d takes c4. And now, before capturing this pawn on b7, interesting decision, h5. And this pawn will prove decisive later on. Look at that pawn. Bishop went away. And now knight takes b7. White is capturing a very nice pawn. But this had to be calculated because queen b6 played, attacking the knight and the pawn on b2. Knight went back to d6, threatening to take on e8. Rook takes e5. Queen takes e5. Queen is fantastically placed. And now queen takes b2. Move 30 with a lot of sharp tactical ideas in the position. And you can see that the queen and knight are fantastically placed. And black's king is lacking pieces. They are not really helping out in defense. Only the bishop is still working on this diagonal, so the knight cannot come to f5. White would love to play here the move knight e8, threatening checkmate on g7. But look at this following defense. Rook takes e8, queen takes e8, king h7. The rook is still hanging. White got to do something about the rook. Let's say he moves the rook away. Could have gone to a6 as well, for instance. But now there's queen c1, king h2, and queen f4. And this is leading to a perpetual check. That would have been an incredible save by Nepo. But of course, Ding doesn't fall for that trick. Instead, he plays the move rook a5 first, maintaining the queen on its central post on e5. So if you ever give check, the king can safely hide on h2 and it's guarded by its own queen. And look, if you would now take on c3, the same idea with knight e8 does work. You're threatening mate. If you stop the mating threat with f6, there is knight takes f6, fantastic shot, g takes f6, and look, queen d5, it's a double attack, but both rooks are hanging. Keep in mind, this rook on a5 is also hanging after the white queen moves. But after king h7, before capturing on a8, very clever, intermediate check, queen b7, with the idea that after king g8, there's queen takes a8 with check, we save the rook, totally game over. So black cannot take the pawn on c3. Instead, he played here the move king h7, getting out of any potential tricks. And now black is planning to take on c3 very soon. For that reason, maybe queen e1 should have been considered. I think that is a very good move because the pawn on c4 is very difficult to defend. After bishop d3, there's this little tactical shot, knight takes c4, bishop takes c4, and queen e4. Check, hitting the rook. White is going to win material. Ding didn't see it. He played here the move rook c5. Very understandable move, aiming for activity. But I think now the key moment of the game. Black had been fighting really hard to stay in the game, but missed a big chance. He should have gone for the move queen takes c3, just taking the pawn. And if white's going to take on f7, this juicy pawn, probably something like bishop d3 could be played to protect the pawn. And well, lines are really difficult, but it's still difficult to create a mating threat. For instance, if you go rook c7, queen c1 check, king h2, and now the move to stay in the game would be rook e8, rook sacrifice, guys. Fantastic idea. Look, if you take the rook, there's queen f4, and we have this same perpetual check mechanism. If the king goes back, it's queen c1. If g3, you take the pawn on f2 with check, king h3, bishop f5, g4, and you cannot get out of all these checks. There's always a queen check on the f-file. But how about this idea? White was teaming up against the pawn on g7. Knight g5 looks like it is a decisive mating threat, discover check, but queen takes g5. Black captures the knight and the queen covers g7. That doesn't work. There are still other lines white could try to keep fighting here for an advantage, but it's not decisive. This is what black should have done, but very difficult to calculate, especially low on time. Queen c1 was played immediately, and after king h2, the move f6 was played, attacking the queen. But white is very happy to place its queen on g3. And now this pawn on g7 is our target. Black played a5, trying to make use of that passer, but that a pawn is really slow. Just the idea, the justification of this move is that white cannot really play rook c7 at the moment, threatening checkmate because black still defends with queen g5. Great defensive idea. Instead, white captured the pawn on c4. Very important pawn. White is a pawn up, finally, but the a pawn is coming fast. But look, now first the knight comes to e3 to interfere on the diagonal so that the queen is unable to come back anytime soon. Black played here the move bishop b1, wanted to free the queen so that the queen never has to keep the bishop defended. But what about a move like a3? Well, then something similar as in the game would probably have happened. Rook c7 would follow, threatening mate, rook g8, knight d5, threatening knight takes f6 as the g pawn is pinned. If you go king h8, there is knight e7. White has the momentum. There are so many forcing moves right now. If the rook goes away, we can simply get our rook behind that pawn to cover all the potential threats. And if queen b2, for instance, to prepare a2, a1 queen, there is queen d6. Fantastic move, attacking this pawn on a3. If you push the pawn, there is knight g6 check. And if black would take, there is queen takes f8 check, and it will be mate on g7 next. So a lot of threats, and it is eventually winning for white. But okay, let's have a look what happened in the game. Bishop b1, and now rook c7 anyway. Threatening that mate again, rook g8, knight d5. Threatening knight takes f6. If you go queen g5, queens can just be swapped, and knight f6 is there in the end anyway. The knight cannot be taken, and after king h8, there is knight takes g8, game over. So that's why king h8 is on the board. The king goes away, but now rook a7. The rook is behind the pawn. That's a good move. a3, and now knight e7, hitting that rook on g8. And the rook went away to f8. And now, tricky moment, it's move 41. The guys have gotten some additional time now to think and to calculate very precisely. And Ding came up with the incredible move d5. And this pawn move, it's the decisive move of the game. And you should understand why. Because the tempting move here would be to play queen c7, to attack this pawn on g7. So the threat is knight g6, but black can still defend here with king h7. And if you go knight g6 now, rook g8, queen f7 for instance, well, there's not much you can do. Black still has queen g5, and there is this idea to take on h5, and then maybe there's queen d1. It doesn't lead anywhere. So queen c7 is not good, but we will see the point of d5 now. First of all, if queen g5, queens are getting of the board. And now the simplest move, and I assume this is what Ding had been calculating. It's knight g6, forking the king and rook. Bishop takes g6, only move, but after h6, g6, the pawn is gone. And black can never really activate that rook from the back rank. If you would go rook d8, rook takes d5, it's mate on the back rank because of that king, thanks to the pawn on g6. So white has time, if black stays on the back rank, just to take the pawn on a3, play c4, 2 connected pass pawns, absolutely game over. Instead, the move a2 was played. The pawn is almost there, but doesn't really threaten to queen. White played queen c7, excellent move. So the queen and rook are working together on the 7th. Queen g5 is not a defense. You're not protecting the pawn because knight g6. Thanks to the pawn on h5, we have access to the g6 square. It's check. If the king moves, it's mate on g7. If you take the knight, it's also queen takes g7 with checkmate, guys. So black played king h7, anticipating the check, but knight g6 played anyway. Threatening the rook, threatening mate. There's no check, no counterplay. Rook g8, defending against the mating threat. And now look, guys, amazing mating motive, which you almost will never see at World Championship level. White played the move queen f7 and black resigned. Why? What is happening? Well, look, if you do something, let's say you would take the pawn on c3, threatening to go a1 queen next. Well, there is queen takes g8, fantastic queen sacrifice, with the point that after king takes, you have rook a8 check. If the king goes into the corner, it's rook h8 with checkmate, as the pawn protects the knight, knight protects the rook, rook gives check, and mate. If the king goes to f7, it's rook f8, and once again, look at these two pawns, pawn on h5 and the pawn on d5. They are both playing a crucial role in the outcome of the game. It's checkmate as the pawn takes away the e6 square. So with queen f7, white sets up the big threat of queen takes g8 followed by mate on a8. If you would take on g6, there's h takes g, king h8, queen takes g8, fantastic queen sacrifice, and once again we have a beautiful mating attack. It's checkmate thanks to the pawn on g6. So that's why after queen f7, Nepo resigned, and the match is even again. It's 3-3. I cannot recall having seen such a World Championship match. Every game is exciting. We have 4 decisive games, and both players are delivering blows to each other. It's simply incredible, and I am very curious what the match is having in store for us in the next couple of rounds. I cannot believe they will keep up such a high level, such a fighting spirit. It's so uncommon. But anyway, I hope they can deliver still as well. I hope you enjoyed this game. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Tomorrow is a rest day, but after that I'll be back with another recap of a hopefully fantastic round 7 game. Bye bye.